Imagine this for a moment. A spy caught red-handed, maybe a high-level official convicted of massive embezzlement, or even someone accused of trying to overthrow the government. Historically, in many places, including Vietnam, these acts might lead straight to the death penalty. But what if that's changing? What if the ultimate punishment is being taken off the table for some of these very serious crimes? Today, we're doing a deep dive into exactly that, Vietnam's really significant recent changes to its criminal justice system, specifically around capital punishment. Our mission here is to unpack the details. Because, this is more than just tweaking a law. It feels like it reflects shifting global views, maybe some cultural nuances, and potentially some very smart strategic thinking. We're going to look at which crimes are affected, why this change is happening right now, and importantly, what it all means for Vietnam's place in the world, and of course, for the individuals directly caught up in the system.
And it really is quite remarkable when you think about it. Reducing the number of capital offenses so substantially, especially for a country with Vietnam's history regarding the death penalty, well, that's not something you see every day. It immediately signals we're not just talking legal technicalities. We're talking about, perhaps, a nation actively reassessing its approach to justice, maybe even its identity on the global stage.
Okay, so let's jump straight into the headline news here. On June 25th, 2025, Vietnam's National Assembly gave the green light to abolish the death penalty for 8 specific crimes. And this isn't happening way off in the future. It's set to take effect from July 2025, so very soon. This move slashes the number of capital offenses from 18 down to 10. That's a huge drop.
A really significant reduction.
And for those 8 crimes, the maximum sentence going forward will be life imprisonment. It's a fundamental shift.
Absolutely. It signals a major reevaluation of how the state deals with some extremely serious offenses.
So what are these 8 crimes? Quite a mix, actually. You've got things touching on national security, public health, the economy. Okay, let's list them out. First, attempting to overthrow the administration, essentially. Treason. That's off the list.
Big one.
Then sabotaging state facilities. Also, producing and trading counterfeit medicine, which hits public health directly.
That's interesting, linking it to public safety concerns like that.
Yeah. And then illegal transportation of narcotics, drug smuggling. Also removed from capital punishment.
Which is notable given the history in the region regarding drug offenses.
Definitely. Then they're sabotaging peace and waging war, and also espionage. And finally, 2 major economic crimes: property embezzlement and bribe-taking. High-level corruption, basically.
Right, so a real spectrum, from state security to economic crime.
Exactly. And the immediate implication is crucial. Anyone already convicted and on death row for these specific 8 crimes before July 1st, 2025, their sentences will be commuted.
Commuted to life imprisonment. So their fate literally changes overnight in a legal sense, from execution to, well, life behind bars.
It's a very tangible, immediate impact for those individuals.
Yeah.
And just to reiterate, that number going from 18 capital crimes down to 10,
Yeah.
it really underscores the scale of this change.
It absolutely does. And if you want to put a human face on it, think about this. Amnesty International estimated that at the end of 2023, Vietnam had over 1,200 people on death row. Now, we don't know exactly how many were convicted of these 8 crimes, but this change could potentially affect hundreds of lives directly.
Hundreds moving from facing execution to facing life imprisonment.
Precisely. And it's important to add a bit of context here. Life imprisonment in Vietnam, by all accounts, is incredibly harsh. It's not, a get-out-of-jail-free card by any means.
No, certainly not.
It still represents an extremely severe punishment. Decades of confinement, complete separation from family and society. In a culture like Vietnam's, where family ties are so central, that kind of lifelong separation can be seen as a sort of social death in itself.
That's a really important point. So it's not softening justice in a simple way, but rather changing the nature of the ultimate penalty for these offenses.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the big question: why? Why make such a significant change now? Let's look at the official explanations first. The Minister of Public Security, Luong Tam Quang, reportedly framed it as a kind of practical adjustment. He suggested the old system, with its 18 capital crimes, wasn't really aligned anymore with Vietnam's current socioeconomic situation and the practical needs of crime prevention today.
So, a pragmatic view, society's changing. The approach to punishment needs to adapt.
Pretty much. And then you have the Minister of Justice, Nguyen Hai Ninh, who highlighted a different angle: international cooperation. He apparently pointed out that reducing the scope of the death penalty could help Vietnam build more trust, foster stronger relationships internationally.
Ah, so the diplomatic dimension. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it suggests a desire, perhaps, to align more closely with international norms, maybe improve Vietnam's image abroad, potentially making it easier to engage in diplomacy, trade, attract investment.
And that immediately makes you think about the layers here, doesn't it? Is this purely driven by a move towards more, let's say, humane justice principles? Or is there a significant element of strategic diplomacy? Many international bodies and key economic partners like the European Union, for instance, they pay close attention to human rights records, including the use of the death penalty.
Right. It can be a sticking point in negotiations or partnerships.
Exactly. So improving that record by reducing capital punishment could, quite pragmatically, smooth the path for better international relations, more foreign investment, maybe even tourism. It's likely a mix of motivations, wouldn't you say? Humanitarian impulses, possibly mixed with strategic calculation.
It often is in international affairs.
It really is. And if we look back a bit, Vietnam has a very long history with the death penalty. It goes back centuries, really. And it was retained after the country's reunification in 1976. For a long time, Vietnam faced quite a bit of criticism internationally for how often it used capital punishment.
Especially for certain types of crimes, right?
Yes, particularly for non-violent offenses, like some drug crimes. There was a period, I think it was between 2013 and 2016, where figures showed Vietnam executed 429 people.
Wow.
Yeah, that placed it among the world's top executioners during those years. So the context is one of historically frequent use.
But it's also important, as you hinted, that this isn't the very first time Vietnam has scaled back. This isn't coming out of nowhere.
No, absolutely not.
Back in 2015, they actually made another significant change, didn't they? They abolished the death penalty for 7 other crimes then.
That's right. That included things like certain drug possession offenses and some forms of corruption. It was part of a wider revision of their penal code.
So this latest move kind of builds on that earlier step. It shows a trend, maybe a gradual but consistent movement away from capital punishment over the last decade or so.
It definitely suggests a pattern, yes. A methodical reevaluation, perhaps, rather than a sudden reversal.
And even the method changed, right? They moved from firing squads to lethal injection.
Yes, that shift happened around 2013. So even within the framework of retaining capital punishment, there have been changes in practice over the years, moving towards methods perceived perhaps as more modern or less brutal.
All these pieces together paint a picture of slow but definite evolution in their approach. Now, this whole situation in Vietnam plugs directly into the much bigger, often heated global debate about the death penalty itself. You basically have 2 main camps, broadly speaking. On one side, supporters argue it's a necessary deterrent. They say it provides ultimate justice for victims of the most terrible crimes, and that for certain acts, it's the only truly proportional response.
The eye for an eye argument in some ways, or ensuring the punishment fits the crime?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then on the other side, opponents raise some really serious points. The biggest one is often irreversibility. The risk, however small, of executing someone who is actually innocent. You can't undo that.
A catastrophic failure of justice if it happens.
Absolutely. Opponents also argue there's little convincing evidence that it actually deters crime more effectively than life imprisonment. And, fundamentally, many view it simply as a violation of the basic human right to life.
So connecting that back to Vietnam's decision, by removing the death penalty for these 8 crimes, it seems like the government is at least implicitly acknowledging some of those counter-arguments, wouldn't you say?
It appears so, yeah. For these specific offenses, at least, they seem to be concluding that life imprisonment is sufficient.
It also brings up an interesting, often overlooked angle, the cost. People sometimes assume execution is cheaper.
Right, intuitively it might seem that way.
But actually, the legal process surrounding death penalty cases, the trials, the mandatory appeals, the special confinement conditions can make it incredibly expensive, sometimes even more expensive than housing an inmate for life.
That's counterintuitive, but often true.
So while life imprisonment is obviously a huge long-term cost for the state, shifting away from the death penalty might in some ways be economically manageable, especially if, as we discussed, it potentially boosts international relations and investment. It's a complex calculation.
And what about the reaction inside Vietnam? That's unlikely to be uniform, I imagine.
No, almost certainly not. You'd expect a mix. On one hand, you'll likely have citizens who welcome this. They'll see it as a positive step, making the justice system more humane, more aligned with international trends they might see as progressive.
A sign of modernization, perhaps?
Perhaps. But on the other hand, you'll definitely have people, and especially, you have to think, the families of victims of these kinds of serious crimes, who might feel very differently.
They might feel justice isn't being fully served.
Exactly. They might feel the punishment is being softened, that it won't deter future criminals, or that it doesn't adequately reflect the severity of the harm done. That sense of retribution can be very powerful.
And you mentioned earlier the cultural context, how life imprisonment itself might be viewed.
Right. That emphasis on family and community means that being permanently separated, locked away for life, might be perceived by some not just as confinement, but as a particularly devastating kind of social eradication almost. It's a different kind of finality compared to execution, but incredibly harsh in its own way within that cultural framework.
So, wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you listening to this? It's clear that Vietnam's decision here is a really big deal. It's a major legal shift, yes, but it's also deeply social. It feels like a delicate balancing act, trying to meet demands for justice while also adapting to changing global norms and, let's be honest, pursuing national strategic interests.
It really does. And it leaves us with a fascinating thought to ponder, doesn't it? How do countries, not just Vietnam, but globally, navigate this tension? The tension between the understandable societal demand for firm justice, especially for horrific crimes, and this evolving international consensus around human rights, around limiting state power over life and death. Is this kind of partial abolition we're seeing in Vietnam a genuine step on a longer road towards a more humane system overall? Or is it more of a calculated, strategic move primarily designed to improve its international standing and economic prospects? Maybe it's both.
It's rarely just one thing.
Rarely. And ultimately, it pushes us to ask that fundamental question: what does justice really mean today in our interconnected, globalized world where different values, different legal traditions are constantly bumping up against each other and influencing one another? That's something we're thinking about long after this deep dive ends.